The other thing that is quite important is the distinction between the complicated and the complex. The complicated is how we've always dealt with things, linear, step by step, very problematic, going to the moon, but we'll get there, it's all very scientific. The complex is the opposite, which is relational. And we're in a world of relational thinking, relational stuff. Bringing up a child is complex because as we bring up the child, we change, it changes, and so on. It has a level of predictability that is quite low. The sort of city we're talking about is this complex stuff, because we've got all these people, for example. The next point I think is important, and I wrote about this in The Creative City, is identifying projects that add value and value simultaneously. So finding projects that are economically worthwhile but do something else as well that might be valuable. For example, empower the people who are in the project. And linked to that is the notion of civic creativity, which is really where the private sector becomes, in a sense, more conscious of that broader public good thing while still using its energy, and the public sector, of course, in reverse, finds a way of being entrepreneurial whilst being accountable in one way or another. Another point which is quite interesting, in spite of the fact that we've talked and banged on about you're not allowed to use the word bang on here, are you? Anyway, you know, talked a lot about, you know, the ideas economy and stuff like that. Isn't it interesting that people are still building so many bloody buildings, spending 95% of the budget on the building, and you can never do the programming because there's no budget left? So the actual programming has completely, again, the budgets haven't been reshifted. So you've got old-fashioned budget systems and thinking which are defining, which is why you have to justify all yourself and do all these advocacy documents that I'm sure you don't want to do. Now, in summary, what this all means is what I call the difference between the urban engineering paradigm to city making to the creative city making. And the difference, just to simplify it, is that the first, it's very hardware focused. You think of the hardware first, whereas in the latter, this one here, what you're thinking of is hardware, software simultaneously. You're saying, how does the hardware help the software, our relationships, how we move around, how we feel good, and all of that sort of stuff in the city. Now, that sounds simple, just those two words, but actually you try and do it in reality, and the resistance is immense, because of course we want these temples that we build, which usually have the name of the mayor or something on it. In the context of all of that, of course, it means that the measures of success and failure need to be dramatically reshifted. Richard earlier talked about that himself. You know, in the CI, I don't know what you call them, SIC codes, we call them, many of the things that we think are valuable aren't in there and aren't countable. And so because they're not countable, we think they don't exist. Well, they are countable and they do exist, mate. All my life, practically, and I'm bored stiff with it, I've been having to argue about the value of creativity, culture, all of this stuff, and design, and so on, which has, of course, put the onus on people like me and you to justify your existence, yeah? The other person on the other side of the fence who's doing the accounts or is the engineer or the traffic person, they don't justify their existence. So I've decided to switch the question round and say, what's the cost of not thinking imaginatively, not thinking in a culturally sensitive and interesting way, not thinking in design terms? What's the cost of that? What's the cost of crime that you're creating by that disgusting building that you've just put up, etc.? Now, you have to use words like disgusting building. We're also politically correct, you know. That disgusting load of crap that you put up, what is the cost of that? Then that ugliness, the pinpricks of that ugliness is going to be there for 50 years every day. Every day. Ugh, that ugliness. You get the drift. Now, what you're seeing globally now, because of this shift to what I'm calling creative city making from urban engineering, is massive degrees of retrofitting. Here's another one. Seoul, yeah? This motorway, boom. Those who've been there know that, yeah? And it's like this. This is the central place where people meet. And the mayor was asked, where did the cars go? And he said, I don't know. And it was brilliant that he said he didn't know, because in fact they disappeared. There didn't seem to be any problems, but this is the benefit. Now, in that, I do think we need to do what I'm calling future-proofing and thinking about resilience, because the thinking is usually yesterday's thinking, and the projects take a long time to happen, people are continually building things with the wrong conception. For example, very near here, and I'm not going to tell you where, is this courthouse. This courthouse is the courthouse that says you are guilty before you're proved innocent. And I thought it was the other way round. Of course this makes you feel like whatever. When you see it, you feel completely frightened and so on. Here's another one near a crime spot in Florida. This is a courthouse in Florida, and apparently it's a crime spot. No wonder. And it's ironic that that courthouse is dealing with the problems they themselves are creating. Isn't it odd? Now, if you had reconceived a courthouse instead of a punishment centre as a centre for civic engagement, you wouldn't dare bloody build something like that. I mean, you know, psychologically, this is a joke. This is Adelaide. Someone mentioned Adelaide today. This is Adelaide's new courthouse. I'm not saying it's wonderful or anything, but it certainly looks different. And before you get proven guilty, at least you can look at a bit of art, you know. I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, you get the general idea, but it's a different conception. Here's a school, tertiary college. This is the factory for drilling in knowledge, yes, the industrial mode of thinking of buildings, as distinct from the thing we all need, which is these centres for curiosity and imagination. Now, would you again build a centre like that if you had the brief Centre for Curiosity and Imagination? This is an art centre, or is it an art centre, or is it a blob? I'm not sure. But you get the drift. These things don't speak to you in any way because the buildings have to speak to the street, and they have a responsibility to the street, which is where you and I hang out, broadly.